So good afternoon and thank you for joining us. My name is Marianne Dandurand and I will be the moderator for today's press conference for the Federal, Provincial, Territorial Ministers of Agriculture Annual Meeting. Bon après-midi et merci de vous joindre à nous. Je m'appelle Marianne Dandurand et je serai la modératrice de la conférence de presse aujourd'hui pour la réunion annuelle des ministres fédéraux, provinciaux et territoriaux de l'agriculture. I'd like to start by welcoming our co-chairs of the meeting, the Honorable Marie-Claude Bibeau, Federal Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food, and the Honorable Margaret Johnson, New Brunswick's Minister of Agriculture, Aquaculture, and Fisheries. I'd also like to welcome the other provincial and territorial ministers participating in today's press conference. J'aimerais souhaiter la bienvenue au co-président de la réunion, l'Honorable Marie-Claude Bibeau, ministre fédéral de l'Agriculture et de l'Agroalimentaire, et l'Honorable Margaret Johnson, ministre de l'Agriculture, Aquaculture et Pêche du Nouveau-Brunswick. J'aimerais également souhaiter la bienvenue aux autres ministres provinciaux et territoriaux qui participent à la conférence de presse aujourd'hui. Ministers Bibeau and Johnson will deliver remarks. This will be followed by a question and answer session reserved for members of the media. Questions may be directed at any of the ministers who have joined us today. We will start with questions in the room and then turn to questions from journalists on Zoom. One question and one follow-up will be permitted. Les ministres Bibeau et Johnson prononceront des allocutions qui seront suivies d'une séance de questions et réponses réservée aux membres des médias. Les questions pourront être posées aux ministres présents en personne. Nous commencerons avec les questions dans la salle, puis passerons aux questions des journalistes sur la plateforme Zoom. Une question et un suivi par médias seront permis. Je cède maintenant la parole à la ministre Bibeau. I will now turn things over to Minister Bibeau.
Merci. Hello, everyone. Bonjour à tous. Thank you for joining us today. I would like to start by acknowledging that we are on the traditional land of the Maliseet, Passamaquoddy, and Mi'kmaq nations. I'd like to thank my co-chair, Minister Margaret Johnson, and her team for welcoming us to Fredericton for our annual conference of federal, provincial, and territorial ministers of agriculture. Margaret, I forgot to ask you at what level you thought before embarking on your career as a politician, but I did sense your great experience in maintaining discipline and positive tone in the room full of people with a lot to say. Thank you for contributing to the spirit of collaboration that made our discussion so fruitful. And thank you for always putting the interests of our agricultural producers at the heart of everything you do. I would also like to thank the other provincial and territorial ministers for your dedication to our farmers, ranchers, our processors, and the sector as a whole. Juste avant de me joindre à mes collègues à Fredericton, je suis passée par Edmundston et j'ai rencontré des producteurs du Nouveau-Brunswick qui viennent d'être frappés par des pluies diluviennes qui ont, entre autres, emporté des routes et même un pont. Tandis qu'une bonne partie de l'Est du Canada est inondée, à l'autre bout du pays, c'est la sécheresse et les feux de forêt qui continuent de nous démontrer que les événements climatiques extrêmes sont une réalité qui ne fera que s'amplifier. Il faut s'adapter et devenir plus résilient. Mes pensées accompagnent tous ceux qui travaillent présentement pour garder les gens en sécurité et les proches de ceux qui ont perdu la vie en combattant les feux de forêt dans l'Ouest canadien. Chaque événement météo extrême nous rappelle à quel point nos productrices et nos producteurs agricoles sont les premiers à être impactés par les changements climatiques. Et chaque fois, ça affecte notre sécurité alimentaire, mais aussi les revenus et leur capacité de bien vivre de leur production. Je remercie la Fédération canadienne de l'agriculture d'avoir ouvert notre conférence annuelle avec un panel sur notre stratégie pour une agriculture durable, qui a réuni plusieurs intervenants du secteur et nous, ministres de l'Agriculture du Canada. Les messages des panélistes ont été entendus et ont donné le ton à notre conférence annuelle. Pour moi, il est clair que les gouvernements fédéraux, provinciaux et territoriaux sont sur la même longueur d'onde sur les grands objectifs à atteindre pour que l'agriculture au Canada soit innovante, durable, résiliente et profitable. On a fait un bon bout de chemin l'an dernier quand on a signé le Partenariat canadien pour une agriculture durable et, depuis avril dernier, les programmes qui en découlent sont en déploiement. Notre pays est vaste Et il faut reconnaître que l'agriculture est différente d'une province à l'autre et même d'une région à l'autre. C'est la raison pour laquelle les provinces bénéficient de beaucoup de flexibilité dans la création des programmes. Chaque province et territoire est engagé à intégrer les risques climatiques dans les programmes agri-protection et agri-investissement, et elles ont fait une mise à jour sur l'avancement de leurs travaux en ce sens. Après l'abolition de la limite sur la marge de référence et l'augmentation du taux de compensation à 80% pour agri-stabilité, on avait discuté de rendre le programme plus rapide, plus simple, plus prévisible. Our close collaboration has enabled us to develop a new approach, and we will soon be able to offer, on an optional basis, a new model that will simplify enrollment and speed up the processing of the Agri-Stability Program. I am also announcing that the federal government will respond positively to the proposal from the Maritime provinces, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Prince Edward Island, to set up a livestock price insurance program based on the model in place in Western Canada. My colleagues and I are all agree that sustainable agriculture must take into account our farmers' resilience to climate change, while also ensuring their ability to make a good living from their production. We reiterate the importance of working together and listening to producers to ensure the future of our agriculture for generations to come. The next generation of farmers and ranchers and the agricultural labor force remain at the heart of our concerns if the sector is to be sustainable. There are examples and good practices all across Canada, and I'd like to thank the New Brunswick producers and processors who have come to present us theirs. Immigrants and temporary foreign workers also play an essential role in meeting the labor needs of the agricultural sector, while the seasonality of the sector and the shortage of housing bring additional challenges. The presentations from the 4 local panelists and our discussions will support the development of our national farm labor strategy, which aims to develop short and long-term solutions to labor shortages across the value chain. Another crucial priority of ours is to support breeders in preventing animal disease and also better preparing for them. Discussions have included lessons learned from the avian flu, programs to support the sector in the event of an outbreak of African swine fever, and the Foot and Mouth Disease Vaccine Bank. Of course, if our farmers are to make a good living from their production, the topic of trade is central. The co-chairs of the Industry Committee gave us a progress report on the Grocery Code of Conduct, which aims to improve relations between all parties of the Canadian food supply chain. The ministers offered support for the industry's proposed solutions, including a commitment to fund the initial creation of a Grocery Code Adjudication Office. We are now calling for broad industry participation in this voluntary code, especially among food retailers, and will be keeping a close eye on its implementation. We also discussed interprovincial trade. With the collaboration of the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, we are working on pilot projects so that slaughterhouses located near a neighboring province can slaughter and process livestock from farmers on the other side of the border. For example, earlier this year, we opened up the trade of food products produced in Lloydminster between the Alberta and Saskatchewan portion of the city, and we are continuing on this path. We also agree on the importance of supporting international trade and diversifying markets. Last year, our agricultural and agri-food exports reached a record value of $92 billion compared to $56 billion in 2016. The rollout of the Indo-Pacific strategy and the opening of our first Agriculture and Agri-Food Office Canada the opening of our first Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada office in Manila, Philippines, will help us accelerate the growth even further. We also talked about defending Canada's trade interests based on science and the current rules in place. We discussed research and innovation and the importance of giving farmers the tools they need to produce. We also discussed the transformation program of the Pest Management Regulatory Agency, PMRA, which reports to Health Canada. Here too, our government is committed to making decisions based on science. The work in progress is aimed at providing greater transparency, greater access to independent data, and investment in research to development alternatives. I also point out that in the context of COP15 and the protection of biodiversity, Canada is part of the 196 countries worldwide that have committed to reducing the risk associated with pesticide use by 50%, reducing the risk, not the use. I reiterated that the federal government recognizes that pest control is essential to food security and that banning pesticides used for agricultural purposes is out of the question. The federal government has chosen to stop using pesticides for cosmetic purposes on Crown land, which we do not consider to be essential, and we invite other jurisdictions to follow suit. It is important that we work together at all levels to circulate accurate information and combat misinformation, which can create additional stress for agricultural producers who already have many other concerns. In conclusion, I'd like to mention the Sustainable Agriculture Strategy, for which we are currently conducting extensive consultations across the country. Although my colleagues and I don't all agree on how to achieve these targets, we all share the same goal: to maintain Canada's position as a world leader in sustainable agriculture, environmentally, economically, and socially. That's why our discussions this week and through the year are so important. I'm confident that by working together and with industry, we can build a competitive, sustainable, and inclusive future for the sector so that Canada keeps being a leader in agriculture and food. Once again, thank you, Minister Johnson, for your warm maritime welcome, whether it was touring the McCain's Farm of the Future, where we saw regenerative agriculture in action, or learning about the sustainable practices at Covered Bridge Potato Chips. The passion for quality, sustainability, and community was obvious. It's thanks to our geographical diversity that we deliver such a variety of amazing food and agriculture products. And I know we are all looking forward to our next annual meeting in Whitehorse next July. I will now turn things over to you, Minister Johnson.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Bibeau. Hello, everyone. Bonjour à tous. We want to thank Minister Bibeau for being a champion of agriculture and continuing to listen to our concerns at the table. We want to tell you how much we appreciate your being here and always listening. Merci d'être ici. Ce fut une semaine très productive de rencontres avec mes collègues fédéraux, provinciaux et territoriaux. We discussed a range of key issues within Canada's agriculture and agri-food sectors, including the successful launch of the 3.5 billion Canadian Sustainable Agriculture Partnership, which came into effect April 1st, 2023. We've also discussed the clean fuel regulations and the disproportionate impacts on farmers, especially here in Atlantic Canada. The agriculture and agri-food sector is an important component of New Brunswick and Canadian economy, and while also feeding Canadians and those across the globe. The sector is resilient and sustainable and will prosper by seizing opportunities and addressing challenges through a collaborative approach. During our meetings this past week, we've discussed many important topics, including business risk management programs, animal health, environment, and labor. As the provincial territorial co-chair, I am pleased with the commitments all parties made to support and advance agriculture and the agri-food sector and to help it succeed. Going forward, we will continue to collaborate with agriculture and agri-food sectors to ensure it can rely on the range of programs when facing extraordinary situations. The Sustainable Canadian Agriculture Partnership will continue to be an effective tool for assisting the agriculture and agri-food sector. The 5-year partnership with cost-shared funding from the Government of Canada is going to allow us to directly support the competitiveness and sustainability of the agriculture and agri-food industry with targeted programs. During our discussions this past week, we also talked about the key roles that innovation, collaboration, and scientific research and development play in continuing to increase productivity and economic growth, while reducing greenhouse gas emissions and protecting the environment. I enjoyed learning what other jurisdictions have achieved in this area and was delighted to share New Brunswick success stories with my colleagues across the country. New Brunswick is home to many companies where hardworking and ambitious New Brunswickers create success stories. For example, New Brunswick achieved a record $689 million in agri-food exports and a record $1.3 billion in farm cash receipts in 2022. We want to see even more success in the years to come for New Brunswick and across Canada. I look forward to continuing to work with my colleagues to make that happen. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you, ministers. Before we take questions, I would like to remind everyone that we'll be taking one question and one follow-up question if needed, and please to address your question to the specific minister you'd like to answer. Avant de commencer la période de questions et réponses, j'aimerais vous rappeler qu'une question et un suivi par médias seront permis. Veuillez adresser votre question au ministre de qui vous aimeriez obtenir une réponse.
Hi. I was curious about what you had mentioned about the voluntary program for grocers. Tell me more about that and why it's not being made compulsory.
So we're talking about the code of conduct, which is meant to be rules for more transparency and predictability between producers, processors, and retailers, generally speaking. We have created a committee almost 2 years ago, I believe. They have been working hard and gathering more and more partners, and they have enlarged the consultation recently. So we expect a very significant participation in the code of conduct on a voluntary base. And it is at the stage to put in place the bureau that will follow or oversee the application of the code of conduct. So we have committed to pay for the 2 first years of this bureau, and we expect that the industry will take over and that it will become a self-financed organization after that.
Okay, you outlined the program, but I don't think you answered the question. Why isn't it being made compulsory? Why is it a voluntary program?
Well, we are confident that working together, the industry showed the leadership. We encouraged them, we provided support, but there was the leadership from the industry, and we are confident that it will be effective, it will work well. So we thought it could be dealt by the industry, it's for the industry. So let's and we're still confident that it can be voluntary and with a very high level of participation. Thank you.
I was interested to hear what you'd said about pesticide usage, and in New Brunswick, and I'm sure elsewhere, there's a very bold, strong environmental movement trying to ban herbicides, mostly on crown land for forestry and whatnot, not on farmland. But how concerned are you with that message going out constantly about the dangers supposedly of herbicides, which we hear from these groups constantly, that will bleed over into the agricultural sector?
The position we've taken is that we make decisions based on science, especially in the agriculture world. It's very important. And we are confident, with the work of PMRA, the Pest Management Regulatory Agency, the way that they allocate the right to use pesticides for specific use, that it's safe. We have also made a decision following the COP15 that we want to reduce the risk. So we have made the decision that voluntarily at the federal level, we will no longer use pesticides when it's not essential for cosmetic use. But we acknowledge that farmers are professionals, they know how to use it. It is essential for food security. It's essential to have good yields and for farmers to thrive, and it's safe. It's being done in a safe way. So I really want to make the difference between the agriculture and the food security importance. The importance for farmers to have the tools they need, and the fact that it can be used in a very safe manner, while we can have voluntary, not supposed to.
I believe that the minister has addressed it sufficiently. We were making all of our decisions based upon science, and PMRA is an independent group, so it's non-biased, non-political, and we hope that they're making decisions and using science to make those decisions. And we consult with them in the federal and provincial levels, and that's how we're going to continue to operate.
Thank you very much. I will now turn things over to James Volduck, our virtual moderator. Je cède maintenant la parole à James Volduck, notre modérateur virtuel.
Thank you, Marianne. A reminder that this virtual question and answer session is reserved for members of the media only. To ask a question, reporters will need to identify their names and affiliation in the chat by sending a message to AAFC Media. Those using a phone line will need to press *9 to raise their hand. One question and one follow-up will be permitted. If you experience any issues, please mention it in the chat during the event or reach out to Media Relations after the call. Merci, Marianne. On rappelle que cette période de questions et réponses est réservée aux médias. Pour poser une question, les journalistes doivent inscrire leur nom et affiliation médiatique dans le messagerie chat en envoyant un message à AAC Media. Ceux et celles qui utilisent un téléphone doivent faire étoile 9 pour lever la main. Une question et un suivi par média seront permis. Si vous éprouvez des enjeux, merci de le signaler dans le chat pendant l'appel ou d'écrire à l'équipe de relations médias après l'appel. So we have our first question from Peter Mitham from Country Life, BC. Peter, you can go ahead.
Good morning from the West Coast, ministers. Minister Pam Alexis's staff had asked me to show up this morning and just ask, what's the status of the agri-recovery application that our minister has proposed for livestock producers hit hard by drought and wildfire? And will there be any chance of the livestock tax deferral program being triggered for these producers at some point this summer, given the early state of this situation?
Thank you for the question. Yes, we've received the request from British Columbia, and the next step is to have both teams from the province and from the federal review the situation, and as long as it reached the threshold, to identify together what will be the expenses of eligible. And I want to assure you that we are proceeding this request as fast as possible. Concerning the livestock tax deferral, I'm working right now with my colleague to see I'm working on it, and I will provide a response as soon as possible.
Okay. Thanks. And just as a follow-up question, you mentioned that the ministers all have discussed animal health and lessons from avian influenza, and was just wondering, can you share any of those lessons that were learned from the avian influenza outbreak?
CFIA, the team, and all our inspectors have been going through this all across the country. So sharing lessons from a province to another as well. But I've also been, I've got comments Wednesday night when we were with members of CFA, the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, that they have seen openness and flexibility from the CFI team to adapt and to learn, through the process. It lasts a year and a half. So they have seen concrete flexibilities. Might be a bit difficult for me to give you concrete example, but in the way they were supported in the field to find the best alternatives in terms of depopulation, in terms of cleaning up the barn and so on. So and the way that we collaborate between the federal, the province, and the industry as well, how the responsibilities are being shared between CFI and the industry. So that type of discussion is still taking place.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next question comes from Karen Briere, the Western producer, who would like to pose a question to Minister Bibeau and Minister Merritt or Minister Sigerson.
Ministers Merritt and Sigerson have had to both leave. Their flights were leaving, so I'm afraid your question will have to be directed to Minister Bibeau alone.
So what is the question?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. I wanted to ask about the status of the agri-recovery requests from Saskatchewan and Alberta, the request for the assessment. Did you discuss that this week?
We did not discuss specifically on, provinces' requests, but I can assure you that both teams and on different requests, because we've got a few from different regions, they are being analyzed by joint team, federal and provincial right now. And we're going to do that as fast as we can, as we have done in previous climate disasters.
Okay, in terms of the sustainable agriculture strategy, it sounded perhaps from your comments that there's a fair bit of discussion and different thoughts on how to achieve that. I'm wondering if you can expand a little bit on that, or what points of contention there might be.
Well, as you know, it's a big country with very different type of agriculture from a coast to another. But I want to reassure, because sometimes people believe that it's only environmental strategy, but I want to say that it's a sustainable strategy, which means that yes, we pay a lot of attention to the agricultural part of it, to how we can have soil that is all healthy, and that we protect water and biodiversity, of course, but we also pay attention to the way we can do it the best. We can achieve these objectives while making sure that our producers, ranchers have the tools they need to have good production, to good yields, because we know that if we want to have healthy communities, we need healthy farmers, as I often say. And the world is turning to us. The world counts on Canada to be fed with the high quality products. And we are all, working together collaboratively. So how we can best achieve our emissions reductions, for example, there are different approaches, but we all agree that we have to keep investing in research and innovation, and to provide incentives and to do it in a positive way to help farmers be as resilient as possible.
Any chance of a third question?
A quick one.
I just wondered if you could expand on the changes to agri-stability.
So the changes is about to make it simpler at the moment you want to apply, and also to make it faster when it's time to receive support. Now, depending on the provinces, the administrator, and there will be two possibilities to register. One will be based on cash accounting. The other one will be based on accrual accounting. Might look seems a bit technical, but it could make a significant difference in terms of accessibility, making it easier to access. We have tried it as a pilot project, and it was working well in certain regions. So it's additional flexibility to make it more timely and understandable.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Not seeing any additional questions on the line right now. Just a reminder to journalists that if you'd like to ask a question, you should send a message to AAFC Media. Si vous voulez poser une question, vous pouvez envoyer un message à AAC Media. Okay, so there are no more questions right now, so I'll turn things back over to Marianne. On n'y a plus de questions, alors je cède la parole à Marianne.
Alors, c'est ce qui met fin à la conférence de presse. Merci, mesdames. This is what ends our press conference. Thank you, ministers. Thank you.